Hi guys, in today's video we'll be creating our own custom object classes, and we'll also be looking at how we can use those classes in other parts of our program. So let's jump into Visual Studio and take a look. So let's start Visual Studio, create new project, console app, .NET Framework, C#. We'll call this one custom object classes. So this is one of the absolute critical skills to developing complex programs, and it's something we've sort of vaguely interacted with as we've used our console program. And actually what you'll see here is class is a type of object and program is what that class is called. So when you create a console application, Visual Studio creates a program class for you and puts a main function in there for you, which is static. And what we will be doing today is creating our own class. So the way we do that is we right click on our project, not our solution, but our project, and click Add Class. We have to give our class a name, and we will be making a contact record. So it's nice and easy to follow. So one thing that Visual Studio does when it creates a new class for you, which is quite annoying, is it doesn't make it public. So currently we've got class contact record. And if we want to be able to use this anywhere else in our program, we have to actually put public at the beginning. And you'll notice as well that the name of this class is green, whereas elsewhere when we've created variables, the name has been gray or white if it's being used. But classes are always green. So that's something to bear in mind. But we can call this anything. You can rename it on the fly. Classes are the building blocks of everything. Everything we've done so far, every object we've talked to, every time we've created a string, we've been using objects that were created for us by Microsoft as part of the .NET framework. But when you want to make your own applications, you will need to make your own classes that make sense for what you want to do. So let's just imagine that we're making a contacts app, and our contacts app is essentially a database of contact records. So we will need to make a contact record class. And when you're building applications, or actually when you're designing applications, you should first think about what does this application need to do. In our case, we need to store records for contacts. So once you know that you need to store some records, well, that gives you a hint that you'll need to create a class, or maybe a bunch of classes that work together to store that record or to hold that data. Contact records is a really good one because everyone's got a phone and everyone will be used to the types of data that will be on a contact record. So let's go through what we need to do to create a contact record. So we've done the first step. We've created a class. We've called it contact record. What we need to now do is have something called properties which hold the data. So where we've used variables before, properties are a kind of variable that you can put on your class, and typically you make those public so anybody else writing programs using your object, or even yourself later trying to use your contact record from another class or another part of your program, it will be available for you to use. So let's create a property for the person's name. So we'll say public because we want it to be accessible by everybody else. And we'll say string because we know that a name is essentially just a string. And we'll say first name. So that's the beginning part of our declaration. And you might find actually this looks a little bit like declaring a function. And it is very similar, except when we're declaring a function, we put a double parentheses after the name, and then we would put the rest of our function at the bottom, and that would give us a function called first name, which returns a string. But what we actually want to do is we want to say open our squiggly brackets and put get semicolon set semicolon. And what this essentially tells the class is that we now have a string called first name, and it can be gotten or get, and it can be set. So people outside of this class and you yourself inside and outside of this class are able to get the value for first name, and they're able to set the value for first name. Now you might find that actually you're happy with everybody getting your first name, but you maybe don't want anyone outside of your class to be able to set it. And the way you could manage that is you could say private set. So then the only bits of code that could set this name are code that is within this scope. We're not going to do that, but it's an option you have to help control how properties in your classes are updated by other parts of your application. Or in some cases, if you are sending code to other people to use as part of a larger project, you maybe want to control how this first name is altered. So you might be in a scenario where you have a private set for first name, but then you have a function called update first name where they pass in a string, and that string then updates the first name like so. This is quite a common scenario because you might want to do some checks. Before someone updates a first name, you might want to make sure that there's no white space at the beginning or white space at the end, or any other type of what we would call validation. You want to make sure that that first name is valid. Like if they pass in the word table, maybe you don't want people to have a first name of table. So it's just some way that you can control how the rest of the program interacts with this particular class. But for the purposes of our simple contact record, we will just have a get and a set. So we've got our first property, and we might think to ourselves, right, well, a contact has a first name. What else do they have? So we will say maybe they have a last name, and maybe they have a phone number. Maybe they have an email address. You can see how you can start to describe what makes up a contact record using these properties. But obviously we're not limited to string. We might actually also store a date time for their birthday, so we know exactly when they were born. And maybe in a more complex program, we check this database every morning and we'd say, oh, actually, it's Steve's birthday today. Maybe we should notify you as a user that it's Steve's birthday. What else might we want to look at? So what else makes up a contact on your phone? You could also, I suppose, some people like myself have a website. So we might have a property for that. As you can see, we're slowly building up this class to be quite useful. If we were to populate this with information, that's the basis for our database, essentially. So now that we've got a contact record and we've got some properties in here that we're quite happy with, I think that's like a pretty good contact. Maybe we might have a profile picture or something later. We'll save this file and we'll go back into our program and we'll look at how we can use that contact record to store some information. So just like how we have previously, where we've created variables and those variables have been of a certain type, so things like strings, integers, we've created a random number generator, and that was a class object called random. What we can actually do with our contact record is we can say var Steve, so we create a variable called Steve, equals new. Remember how we've used new? We've used it for when we created the random object, when we've been creating lists of strings and integers. New essentially tells the compiler in Visual Studio that you want to create a new instance of a object. So we have to specify which object we want to create. In our case, it's going to be a contact record. and we're going to open and close our parentheses, and you'll see here we haven't actually got any parameters that it's asking for, and there's no overloads because we haven't programmed any. This is our own object, and it's very, very new, and it's very minimal right now. So we can create it, and then we can finalize our line. Now, if we start typing Steve dot, what you'll see here is we have all of these properties that we specified in our class. Ooh, let me just go back. In our class declaration, these are all being pulled in from our contact record. And you'll see here, when you see a property in the autocomplete list, it shows up as a spanner. You'll also see that we've looked at before, these purple cubes are functions, and you might think, actually, well, I didn't create a get type function or a get hashcode function or an equals function or even a toString function, but actually those are part of all objects. So every time you create an object, it's essentially a child object of the object. So I can understand that's a bit confusing, but essentially all objects share a common ancestor, you could think of it like. So, and the common ancestor for a basic object like what we've created here would be object. And the way that we can actually express that in code is we can say contact record colon object. And this kind of happens for you automatically. So every time you create a class, if you don't put a colon after it and specify what its sort of ancestor is, what its parent object is, then Visual Studio just assumes that it's an object. Object is always the very, very bottom parent class for every type of object. So it's worth bearing in mind. So let's go back in here. So we've got Steve, and we've created a new record and assigned it to Steve. And now let's just populate that record. So we might say first name equals Steve. And we might say Steve's last name is Smith. And maybe we know Steve's phone number is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. It's probably not, but let's put that in there. And Steve also has an email address, which is me@steve.com. You can see here, we've got this, essentially, you could think of it like a complex variable. It's like a variable which contains nested variables. What else have we got? We've got birthday. Let's say Steve's birthday is, I don't know, maybe he was born in 1982 on October the 13th at 12:54 and 11 seconds. We know exactly when Steve was born because he's our pal. And I believe, oh no, Steve must also have a website. So we'll say steve.website equals, and actually what you might not know is Steve, his website is google.com. So now we've created a contact record. We've got Steve, we've got all of his details, and we've stored them in this Steve record, which is a type of contact record. So one thing you can do anywhere in Visual Studio where you see a class name is you can right click it and you can click go to definition. So this is really handy when you've got, for example, you might have a very complex project with, hundreds of different classes, and you might have them separated out into different folders. And actually you might find that you can't remember exactly what you did on the contact record. You can actually just right click and click go to definition. And what will happen is it will open up the contact record, but it'll open it up on the right hand side. And if you were to click off of it or click onto, right click maybe this and click to go to definition, it'll just replace the one on the right hand side. So the right hand side is kind of like a file you're looking at, but it isn't quite open yet. One way that you can open it is if you go to definition and you've got it up here on the right, even just popping a space in there will pop it over onto the left because you've edited it. Once you start editing it, it'll open as a file in your sort of tabbed open files section here. So that's a good way to jump backwards and forwards. Maybe you get here, you start populating your contact, you're like, actually, yeah, I need another property. So you just jump in here, go to definition. You might even already have it open, but you might have like 20 other files open. So just a way of navigating around quickly when focusing on different types of object that you're interested in, rather than just kind of trying to navigate through what could become a very complex project structure on the right. So I know this video is getting quite long. I'm going to call it there. And in tomorrow's video, we will continue to look at classes, and we will actually start adding some functions onto our classes to make them a bit more functional, I guess. Hi guys, well done for making it to the end of the video. Just a quick heads up that there is a link to the project files from today's session in the video description. If you have any questions about anything we've covered today, feel free to leave me a comment. And as always, I will see you in the next one.